we're going to stay on topic so we can get through it really quick. And then I love taking just general fanfic questions,
Ditto.
so we'll do that.
Sweet.
Next. Okay, so we're going to talk about crossovers first. And we're just going to define it, and we're going to give you
Some examples.
And then we're going to do some tips and pros and cons and that kind of thing.
So,
Crossover. Go ahead, definition.
yay, definition. Okay. Is a merging of two or more fictional casts and worlds into a plot. And so, yeah, that's it. That's the definition.
So like Ranma 1/2 meets Trigun.
Yes.
Right.
You know.
Or Bleach meets Naruto.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In the different categories.
We kind of had crack fic, which is just a wild idea, no plot, random scenes, and just you make them meet because you want to. It is like making, Doctor Who show up in Naruto just because you want to see the Doctor and Sasuke meet up.
Yeah, it's like, I like Doctor Who and I like Naruto. Let's write a story. And usually they're awful.
Yeah.
They get out of whack pretty easily, and you have no idea what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. And if the crack fic is handled well, it is amazingly hilarious. But if you want to do one, you have to be careful. Don't just do something insane to do something insane. Make sure there's
still a character.
Yeah, there's still a character. Your characters are in character. Like, my favorite crack fic of all time is literally one where it's a Stargate and Doctor Who crossover. And literally, it's just Daniel Jackson and Samantha Carter are walking down the street, and they see this weird guy in a suit laughing at Daniel. And so they go up and ask why, and it's the doctor, and he just says, because I laugh at all archaeologists. But they do it so well that, it's a crack fic, and it is pure crack, but at the exact same time, it's done well enough that you can live with it.
Most crack fics are somebody got together with their friends and they came up with some wild ideas while they were high on sugar, And they're like, I wrote it into a story, and then nobody else besides their friends really understands what happens in it because they weren't there. It's almost like an in-joke. And they're not really setting out to write a story and to entertain other people. And luckily most people, when they write a crack fic, they label it as so.
Yes.
So I can avoid it. I hate crack fics. I spend so much time plotting. When somebody writes a crack fic, it offends my sensibilities. It really does. And I understand, the short silliness, and some people have to get it out, and sometimes they're good, but it offends me because my stories are always long and super plot, So.
Yeah, ditto. Okay, I wrote one crack fic, but yeah.
I don't look down on people, I just don't read it.
Yeah, no, you can write crack fic and it can be good. And my crack fic was basically a list of things that Enterprise, the 2009 version of Star Trek, their crew couldn't do based on their admirals. And it was just a bunch of cracky ideas that we thought they would get up to, like using the Enterprise as part of a lighting rig for a rave. Yeah, but
It's not personal fanfic time.
Yeah, I know, I'm going away. Okay.
I want to talk about general stuff.
Okay, so plot device, something gone wrong is another one that you can use. Like the experiment jutsu spell goes wrong that and somebody ends up somewhere else completely. That one's pretty obvious. So,
The villain-induced crossover. Sometimes the villain's trying to do something and something explodes, or, same thing, a spell goes wrong. But usually in that crossover, the good guys merge together and they go to defeat, the big bad in whosever world they're stuck in, so that they can, take whoever is out of their world back home.
Another one is a natural crossover. Like they live in similar universes, so they just live there, and it's natural.
Like the rules of the universe are so similar, it kind of feels like, they could, I've seen Marvel do it all the time.
Yeah.
Like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, they all live in the same world. Because they all live by the same laws of physics. So, in the next, it all kind of exists in the same universe. And there's a lot of, if you get two different high school comedies, chances, you could put the schools next to each other and make them rival schools or something like that because the universe is so similar.
Yeah, and then like another one is the romance crossover, which is purely created, and any of the other categories can be used to make a character from Series A and a character from Series B get together, and that's the entire point of the crossover.
Those are mostly crack fics too.
Yes. You get to go to this one.
The self-insert crossover. The teaser for it on fanfiction.net always looks like me and my friends fall into the magical universe where I get to meet my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah. So it's our world crosses with the fictional world type thing.
Oh.
Usually, or sometimes they're like their pen name. Not necessarily their real names, but their friends. Fictional personas, and they go meet your favorite characters, or even the favorite characters come into their world.
Yeah. So then another one is just random portal, which can also be crack, but if it's handled well, you can turn it into an entire book series. Like Eric Flint, if anybody has read him, he does a random portal that is not explained in any way. Yeah. Okay. But so yeah, random portal not explained. Naruto comes across a dark swirling vortex in a forest and falls into the Death Note universe. And
That'd be kind of creepy.
that would be kind of creepy. But another one is like an AU crossover where you end up in an alternate universe of that series. So like a mirrorverse type of thing.
They
from
meet
Star
they
Trek.
meet their alternate universe selves.
So like they're the opposites.
Yeah. Transformers has an alternate universe where the good guys are bad and the bad guys are good. That fan fiction writers like to do a lot.
Yeah, same with the Star Trek universe, things like that. And it doesn't have to be a complete opposite. It can just be, they're more competent or they're less competent.
Or their history's different.
Yes.
Or they're in
It's a fantasy world instead of a sci-fi.
So that would kind of for like I'm actually toying with this right now. It's a Tenchi fanfic, but there's subtle references like to maybe some British sci-fis, and eventually I'm going to have Tenchi takes the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and he goes through, the
That's
galaxy.
not necessarily a crossover if they don't actually meet a separate cast.
Yeah, well, they do meet unit characters, and there's a talking toaster, but
Otherwise,
that's it.
it's more like a cameo. If he just hits, if
Yeah.
he picks up the Hitchhiker's Guide, is kind of like just a quick salute to the Hitchhiker's fans. It's not necessarily considered a crossover because they need to actually meet a different cast.
Yeah,
Two
well, they do
casts
meet. I mean, they meet some unit characters, like from Doctor Who. They meet some, forget the name, the greatest caterers in the world, in the
multiple
universe.
series
Yeah.
crossover.
Multiple
But
series crossovers.
but otherwise, they never meet Arthur Dent, they never meet the Doctor. They just references to the races and the
Yeah, and those are more like
organizations.
toss-ins and not necessarily crossovers.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay.
The alternate. What's the alternate?
Of course, unfortunately, in that
what's
case,
Yeah.
Alternate.
Yeah.
AU. We're not talking about AU.
Well, it's an alternate. Okay, so there's one that we kind of have that's called like that we consider an alternate AU, which is a Series A, which is mostly canon, meets an alternate version of Series B so that it will fit better. So, like, say you've got a sci-fi series running around, they run into, like, a sci-fi version of a fantasy universe so that your characters can meet and mesh up without having it be too much of a culture clash. So, like, one of the ones that's my favorites, which does it really well, is like a Stargate SG-1 universe meets up with an alternate version of Gundam Wing, because obviously by Stargate time they don't have Gundams on Earth, so they had to translate Gundam Wing onto another universe, and instead the Gundams are like fighter pilots. So it's just creating a different world, a different version of a world so that it can mesh better, which is pretty much what it is.
And that's a big mess. I mean,
Yeah.
you really, really want, and I don't suggest you do it unless you absolutely have some kind of like way crazy, awesome idea that needs to be told. That's a lot of work. If you're not prepared to do that kind of work to actually make it make sense to the
Decent,
reader.
Don't.
I love plot like nothing else, and that makes my head spin. I don't even want to think about I want to take two worlds, but I want to make this world different, and I'm like, oh, really?
If it's done well, it's done
Yeah.
well. If it's done bad, you cry and you run away.
Yeah.
You better be dedicated to making that work.
Yep. Some general tips. Your story kind of goes on to what we just kind of went on. There has to be a point, and your plot has to be planned out prior. Don't just jump in there unless it's a crack fic, and even then just label it. so
Most
people know not for
crossovers
a
never
plot.
get finished because they start it and they don't know what they're going to do with it.
It's almost
And, because they get excited because it is fun. You're like, I love these characters and I love these characters. What if they met? What would they do? And it is kind of really fun. But, they never get finished
And
because
unfortunately,
the
like your-
author doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't have an ending in mind.
Right.
And so even if people like it, either
Or-
the ending's going to be bad or it's not going to end.
Yeah.
Or like with the previous panel. I mean, yeah, so often that's the thing I got to really work on. How am I going to? I mean, maybe the first chapter is just crack chapters, but eventually you'll want to have an actual, progressing story, climax, conclusion, and
Yeah.
so it works. I mean, eventually it's just going to be more of just a Tenchi fic. He's just going to go off and people
So
are
I
going to tag
tell
along.
writers, no matter what you're writing, I mean, you have to have an end.
Right.
Because the end is what you leave the readers with. And you have to decide, you have to leave them with a certain feeling because the ending really defines how people feel about the entire story. If an anime does it all the time, the story will be really good and then the ending blows. I just watched Ergo Proxy and it was the most amazing show I'd ever seen and it failed miserably at the end. And my roommate had bought it and she just sold it the next day. She was, and I loved that show and I'll probably never ever watch it again because the ending was so bad. And Japan really blows at endings for some reason.
Oh, yes.
They very seldom deliver a good ending. So I get really excited when I see an anime that has a good ending.
In fact,
Hey,
Okay. Go ahead.
we need to move on.
Right.
But we're talking about fanfic stuff. We're not talking about.
Right.
Okay. So
Next tip, grounded and conceivable idea. Unless it is a crack fic, you have to have at least a solid explanation of how and why the crossover is occurring. If it's a spell gone wrong, it can't be like a cleaning spell that goes wrong. It has to be there are physics involved with the spell or there are magics involved with the spell that make it make sense.
except for random portal.
Yeah, except for random portal. Sorry, crack and random portal, which are generally, integrate the worlds well, and on that, you have to really be able to integrate the worlds well if completely different philosophies or style. Like, for instance, if you put a completely, depressing anime where the overall style is to make you feel horrible with a chipper, upbeat, skip beat type of thing. You've got to be able to integrate the worlds and the styles. Otherwise, it's just going to make you cringe the entire time, and it definitely leads to out of characterness and annoyingness. Do you want the next one or?
I don't even know what you're looking at anymore.
Okay. So cross universes that can mix and make sure your plot is understandable, so if you need to, simplify it. But yeah.
I want to do pros and cons.
Yep. You want to do the pros and cons?
Yeah. Those
Okay.
are my favorite parts. Okay.
Okay, you've got the pros and the avoid.
Is it a question?
Well, more of it. This is kind of
Okay.
but I just want to ask about posting on fanfiction.net.
Okay, no. We have to stay
Well-
on topic so we can finish and then we can do general.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this still refers to crossovers. I'm just
Oh, like saying it is a crossover?
okay. The problem is Tenchi Milieu and GPX have their separate entries, but technically, at
There's
least,
a
but they're-
crossover section for anime. You just
But-
have to label it as a crossover, and
Okay.
it will go in both categories
Right.
in the crossover section.
I mean, you still go bother crossing over, even though technically they are the same universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So pros.
Done.
Why would people write a crossover? What's good about it? Your favorite characters get to meet. We talk about that. Usually crossovers are good for comedy.
Yes.
They don't make very good super dramas. Every once in a while they do. But excellent comedies. I mean, that's usually where they come from because it's hilarious when certain characters meet. What am I looking at? And they're fun. I mean, that's the reason people make them, because they're fun.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with doing a crossover. The cons, though,
Come join us.
I need to see if there's a microphone here. The microphone. I need to check which one it is.
the cons to doing a crossover is you instantly double your cast.
Mm-hmm.
And the harder, the more characters you have, the harder it is to juggle them, because you can't, if you bring the character in, you can't forget they're there. You have to constantly let the reader know what every character is doing, if you can. And to double your cast in just, a quick easy step of magic portal, can be a disaster. So you may want to, just cross over a couple characters.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to take like the whole cast into the next, to help you, you take your plot and you say, who exactly do I need to do this plot? And take the bare minimum characters. And that will really help you streamline and keep track of everybody that you're trying to write about. The biggest reason that I wouldn't do a crossover is actually because I love my reading audience and I like to please them. And if you do a crossover, the chance is, because you usually write heavily in one series. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I write heavily in one series. And if I do a crossover, I have a chance of losing half of my reading audience. Because if I'm crossing over a series they've never heard of, they may not read it. Or if they don't like the series, they may not read it. Or you may get some new people who, saw the cross and they're like, because you are dipping into another fandom who've never seen you before if you haven't written about that fandom until your crossover. But I've done one published crossover on fanfiction.net, and I've had people tell me they didn't want to read it because the other series that I crossed with it didn't interest them. So, and it was part of a bigger story arc, so I made that story, you could take it out and not miss anything, importantly story-wise, just so I could keep all my readers happy. So those who did like the crossover could read it, and those who didn't could skip it and still, go on. So, it depends on your frame of mind. If you don't care if your reader likes it, if it's just like, bonus, they like my story, that's okay. But I really I write because I like to entertain people. I don't necessarily write just because I like to keep words locked in my closet and they're for me. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. I've entertained them constantly, so that's why I write. What's our other pros? They can bomb easily because, like we said, it's easy to get carried away. It's easy to lose track of your plot. It's especially if you don't have an ending. So we're gonna push.
Okay.
Let's go to.
Avoid more characters than you can handle.
We talked
Avoid OCs or Mary Sues.
Oh yes, if you have a Mary Sue and it's part of the series, that's fine. Do not introduce, because we talked about bigger cast. Don't be like, I'm going to take this alternate cast and my Mary Sue, which you've never met before, so you're not familiar with this character either, and put them all together in a mixing pot. Then you've just got so many characters, so you have to, and I when you're writing a crossover and you have, your main audience and then you have that extra cast that you're crossing over, because some people will try to read it if they like your stuff and they know you as an author. They'll give it a chance anyway. They're like, maybe I don't know this series, but maybe I can, I can fake it just to see what's going on in the plot. So, I try to, explain things simply and keep that in mind so people who aren't familiar with the show will at least be able to keep track of the characters. Because, when you write an original story, they don't know any of the characters to begin with. You have to introduce them. And you can do that with the crossover too, so the people can understand who these characters are. But if you have to introduce those characters and your Mary Sue, or any original cast, more characters than you can handle. So I highly suggest not doing a crossover and a Mary Sue at the same time.
And avoid being out of character. And yeah.
Out of character is a hard one.
Yeah.
Everybody suffers from out of characterness.
Oh yes.